May 20th, 1958, Monte Carlo. The world's motoring press has gathered for the Monaco Grand Prix, but the British Motor Corporation has something else in mind. While racing teams prepare their machinery for the Principality's tight corners, BMC is about to unveil what many considered automotive heresy, a sports car with no door handles, no boot lid, and headlights that stick up like a startled frog. The Austin-Healey Sprite should have been laughed off the stage. Instead, it became one of the most beloved sports cars Britain ever produced, selling nearly 49,000 units in just 3 years and forcing the mighty MG to swallow its pride and copy the design. But here's the thing. Donald Healey and his team knew exactly what they were doing. They understood something the traditional sports car makers didn't. Sometimes the best way forward is to throw out the rulebook entirely. To understand why the Sprite mattered, you need to understand Britain in 1958. The country was finally shaking off the grey blanket of post-war austerity. Food rationing had ended just 4 years earlier. Harold Macmillan would soon tell the nation they'd never had it so good. But the truth was more complicated. The economy was growing, certainly, but inflation worried the government. Working families were buying washing machines for the first time, yet petrol remained expensive and roads were narrow. The British car industry was booming, leading Europe in production, but sports cars remained toys for the well-heeled. Into this world came a car that cost less than a Morris Minor, yet promised genuine sports car thrills. It was built from leftover parts, designed on a shoestring, and compromised in ways that would make modern safety regulators weep. Yet it worked. More than that, it rewrote the rules for what a sports car could be, proved that monocoque construction belonged in sports cars, and created a template so successful that even MG, the company whose market gap it filled, had to adopt it wholesale. This is the story of how a car that shouldn't have worked outsmarted everyone. Section 1. The parts. Bin special that changed everything. Let me tell you how desperate the situation was. Leonard Lord, chairman of BMC, and Donald Healey were having one of their regular meetings, probably over a glass of scotch, when both men voiced the same concern. Sports cars were pricing themselves out of reach. The Austin-Healey 100 was doing well, certainly, but it cost serious money. The MG T-Type midget had been discontinued, leaving a gaping hole at the bottom of the market. Enthusiasts were building their own cars from kits, often with questionable results. Healey returned to his workshops in Warwick with a challenge: create a proper sports car that could sell for around £600. To put that in perspective, that was roughly the price of an Austin A35 saloon. For a sports car with genuine performance credentials, it seemed impossible. The engineering team, led by Donald's son Geoffrey, chassis designer Barry Bilby, and stylist Jerry Coker, got to work. Their solution was beautifully simple: raid the BMC parts bin and engineer the rest with ruthless efficiency. The engine came straight from the Austin A35, a 948 cubic centimetre A-series unit producing a modest 43 horsepower at 5,200 revolutions per minute. Twin 1 1/8 inch SU carburetors and a tuned exhaust helped, but nobody pretended this was a powerhouse. The front suspension, rear axle, and many other components were lifted wholesale from the A35. The steering rack came from the Morris Minor. The hydraulic brake master cylinder was borrowed from MG. This wasn't just parts bin engineering, it was parts bin genius. The revolution lay in the chassis. Barry Bilby looked at the Jaguar D-Type and adapted its principle of routing suspension loads through the body shell itself. The Sprite became the world's first volume production sports car to use unitary construction. There was no separate chassis. The floor pan, sills, and transmission tunnel provided all the structural strength. BMC's bean counters initially tried to save money by reducing the thickness of the steel in the rear structure. When testing at the Motor Industry Research Association facility revealed deformation and distortion, they had to concede that Bilby had been right all along and restored his original specifications. The body was another masterstroke of cost-conscious design. Jerry Coker created a one-piece front assembly, bonnet, wings and all, that hinged from the back and swung up for engine access. No fiddly separate panels to align and fit. The entire rear bodywork was sealed, no boot lid at all. Access to the spare wheel and luggage space required tilting the seatbacks forward and reaching into what owners described as a cavernous but pitch-black cavity. Some compared it to potholing. And those headlights, oh, those headlights. The original design called for retractable units that would flip up from within the wings, lenses facing skyward when not in use, similar to what Porsche would do decades later with the 928. But retractable mechanisms cost money, and BMC was watching every penny. So the headlights simply stayed up, mounted prominently atop the bonnet. The result was a face that looked perpetually surprised, delighted, or, depending on your perspective, amphibian. The British called it the Frogeye. Americans went with Bugeye. Either way, that face became iconic. By late 1956, the first prototype, designated Q1, was complete. It was delivered to BMC's Longbridge facility in January 1957 for evaluation. Leonard Lord and his successor, George Harriman, both liked what they saw. Production was green-lighted as type number AN5. Initially, assembly was planned for Longbridge alongside the A35, but that would have required fitting the drivetrain from beneath, necessitating chassis modifications that would make the car wider. Instead, production was assigned to MG's factory at Abingdon. The irony was delicious. MG, whose market the Sprite would dominate, would actually build the thing. Section 2, the launch that shouldn't have succeeded. Donald Healey understood marketing. The Sprite's public debut was scheduled for May 20th, 1958, precisely 2 days before the Monaco Grand Prix. While the world's motoring press was already in Monte Carlo covering the race, Healey put them all in hotel rooms and gave them the keys to the Sprite. It was an expensive gambit, flying journalists to the south of France and putting them up in decent accommodation, but it paid off magnificently. Tommy Wisdom, a respected motoring writer of the era, called it the first ever people's sports car and claimed he'd never driven a safer, faster car. The Daily Mirror in London announced a new nippy sports car, the sort that big manufacturers have not marketed since before the war, makes its appearance today. The hyperbole flowed freely, and orders started pouring in. The specifications on paper seemed almost embarrassingly modest. That 43-horsepower engine pushed a car weighing just 660 kilograms, 1,300 pounds or so. 0 to 60 miles per hour took 20.5 seconds, according to the Motor Magazine's road test. Top speed was 82.9 miles per hour. Fuel consumption of 43 miles per gallon was respectable at least. The test car, with its hardtop, cost £678, including taxes of £223. But numbers on a page couldn't capture what the Sprite felt like to drive. The seating position was low, sports car low, not saloon car low. The steering was direct, using rack and pinion when many sports cars still employed vague recirculating ball systems. The suspension, despite using humble A35 components up front and quarter-elliptic leaf springs at the rear, delivered handling that impressed everyone who drove it. Road and Track magazine in America summed it up perfectly. It offers more fun per dollar than anything we have driven. The production version wasn't without its quirks and compromises. To enter the car, you reached through the open window to operate the internal door handle. There were no external handles at all. Wind-up windows? Forget it. You got simple side curtains that flapped and leaked. The hood was a wrestling match to erect and never really sealed properly. One road test car leaked water across the top of the windscreen. The interior was cramped enough that anyone over 6 feet tall struggled to fit. The instruments were a random assortment from the BMC parts bin, scattered across the dashboard without much logic. None of it mattered. The Sprite felt special in ways that transcended its humble origins. At town speeds, it was perky and responsive. On a winding B road, it came alive. The steering talked to you. The little engine buzzed eagerly toward its 5,500 revolution limiter. The modest weight meant you could carry speed through corners without drama. It wasn't fast in absolute terms, but it felt fast, and that made all the difference. The final price was £669, slightly above the original £600 target, but still remarkable value. In America, it sold for $1,795, making it one of the most accessible, genuine sports cars on the market. Production began in March 1958 at Abingdon, and the orders kept coming. Section 3. Competition, Success, and the MG Dilemma. BMC's competitions department wasted no time proving the Sprite's sporting credentials. In June 1958, just weeks after the launch, John Sprinzel and Willie Cave took a Sprite to the Alpine Rally and won their class. It was the first of many competition successes that would establish the Sprite as a giant killer in motorsport. The following year, BMC sent specially prepared Sprites to America for the 12-hour race at Sebring, Florida. Jeffrey Healey himself prepared these cars at the Cape Works in Warwick, fitting larger 1¼ SU carburetors, prototype Dunlop disc brakes all around, wire wheels, and close-ratio gearboxes with dual-plate clutches. The Sprites achieved a stunning trifecta finish in their class, with drivers including Sterling Moss taking victory. For a car that cost less than £700, it was an extraordinary achievement. Private competitors embraced the Sprite with enthusiasm. Companies like John Sprinzel's operation, Speedwell, and WSM developed performance parts and complete race-prepared cars. The Sebring Sprite, with its streamlined aluminum and fiberglass body, became the most iconic racing variant. These works cars eventually produced a reliable 110 horsepower and could achieve speeds around 150 miles per hour on the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans. In 1965, a Sprite managed a remarkable 12th place overall at Le Mans, extraordinary for such a small displacement car. But here's where the story gets really interesting. While the Sprite was racking up competition wins and sales, the people at MG found themselves in an awkward position. The original Frogeye had been explicitly designed to fill the gap left by the discontinuation of the MG T-type midget. The MGA had replaced the T-type, but it was larger, more expensive, and aimed at a different market. MG buyers who wanted an affordable basic sports car were turning to the Austin-Healey Sprite. The irony couldn't be ignored. MG was building the Sprite at Abingdon, watching it succeed in the very market segment they'd abandoned. Something had to be done. BMC management decided that if you can't beat them, join them, or in this case, badge engineer them. Work began on a revised Sprite with a more conventional front end, repositioned headlights, and, crucially, a boot lid. The result was announced in May 1961 as the Austin-Healey Sprite Mark II. 1 month later, in June 1961, BMC revealed the MG Midget Mark I. The Midget was, to be perfectly frank, a Sprite with a different grille, badges, and slightly better interior trim. It had chrome strips along the bonnet and side panels that the Sprite lacked. The instruments were marginally better, the price was correspondingly higher, but mechanically identical. Same engine, same transmission, same suspension, same body structure. MG had essentially admitted that Donald Healey's approach had been right all along. What makes this even more remarkable is that the midget would eventually outlive the Sprite and prove more popular with buyers. When British Leyland ended its licensing agreement with Healey in 1971, the final 1,022 Sprites were sold simply as Austin Sprites. The Healey name unceremoniously dropped to save royalty payments, but the midget, it continued production until 1979, 8 years after the Sprite name disappeared. Section 4. The legacy of compromises done right. By the time production of the Mark I Frogeye ended in 1961, BMC had built 48,987 units. That's a remarkable number for a 3-year production run of what was essentially a niche product. The car had achieved everything Healey and Leonard Lord had hoped for. It put genuine sports car ownership within reach of thousands of enthusiasts who otherwise couldn't have afforded one. The Sprite proved several things that the British motor industry struggled to learn consistently. First, that clever packaging and parts sharing could create something greater than the sum of its components. Every major part on the Sprite came from existing BMC products, yet the whole felt special and purpose-built. Second, that character could triumph over specification sheets. The Sprite was slow by any objective measure, yet it delivered more driving pleasure than many faster, more powerful cars. Third, that compromises, if done thoughtfully, needn't feel like compromises at all. They could become defining characteristics. The monocoque construction pioneered by the Sprite would become standard practice for sports cars. The idea that a lightweight, affordable sports car could share components with economy saloons became industry orthodoxy. The lesson that handling and driver engagement mattered more than straight-line speed influenced generations of sports car design. Even that permanent grin on the Sprite's face taught designers that emotional connection mattered. People bought cars that made them smile. Current values reflect the Sprite's enduring appeal. While you can find project cars for $5,000 or less, good running examples typically fetch $15,000 to $25,000. Exceptional original Frogeyes with documented history have sold for over $50,000 at auction. That's remarkable appreciation for a car that was never particularly valuable when new, that was never rare, and that shared virtually all its components with mundane saloon cars. The Sprite also democratized motorsport in ways that reverberate today. Its low purchase price, simple mechanics, and parts commonality with mass-market cars meant that ordinary enthusiasts could afford to race. You didn't need a wealthy sponsor or a factory team contract, just enthusiasm, basic mechanical skills, and perhaps a copy of one of the many tuning manuals that companies like Speedwell published. Sprites competed successfully in everything from club racing to international rallying to speed trials on Bonneville's salt flats. They still do. Vintage racing grids worldwide feature Sprites and midgets, often heavily modified but recognizably descended from that 1958 parts bin special. So here's what really happened with the Frogeye Sprite. Healey didn't set out to outsmart MG. He set out to fill a gap in the market that MG had left open. But in doing so, he created something so successful that MG had no choice but to follow his lead. The midget that appeared in 1961 wasn't MG reclaiming its territory. It was MG admitting that Healey had gotten it right. The Sprite succeeded precisely because it shouldn't have. All those compromises, the parts bin engineering, the missing door handles, the sealed boot, those grinning headlights, created a car with genuine character. It felt special, not despite its limitations, but because of them. You couldn't take it seriously, which freed you to simply enjoy it. And enjoy it people did in their tens of thousands. The real genius lay in understanding what made a sports car a sports car. It wasn't horsepower or luxury or expensive materials. It was the connection between driver and machine, the joy of exploiting momentum rather than power, the pleasure of driving a slow car fast, rather than a fast car slow. The Sprite taught an entire generation that lesson, and many of them never forgot it. Today we'd call the Sprite's approach minimalist or driver-focused and charge a premium for it. In 1958 they called it cheap and basic. Outsmarted just called it fun. He was right then, and 7 decades later, the surviving Sprites prove him right still. If you owned a Frogeye, or a Sprite of any generation, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. What made your car special? What adventures did you have? What mishaps befell you? These cars were built to be used and enjoyed, not locked away in climate-controlled garages. Every Sprite has stories, and those stories are part of what makes them matter. If you've enjoyed this dive into automotive history, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that like button if you learned something new, or if you're now searching classifieds for a Frogeye of your own, don't worry, we've all been there, and share this with anyone who needs reminding that sometimes the best engineering solutions are the simplest ones, that character beats specification, and that you can indeed keep a proper sports car in your bike shed. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and remember, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow.